we're here for the school principal, Michelle Sparks. We're here to verify her status.
Before anyone goes further, I need to see your
We don't
identification.
owe you a warrant. We're federal agents. We're going in.
This is a school. You are not approaching my principal without a judicial warrant. Show me your ID. Show me.
The hallway at Lincoln Academy was quiet when it happened. Thursday morning, 8:23 a.m. The kind of early silence where fluorescent lights hum louder than voices and coffee hasn't kicked in yet. School Administrator Lillian Sherman was reviewing attendance reports when she heard the boots. Heavy, tactical, wrong. She looked up to see masked ICE agents moving past the bulletin boards displaying student artwork, led by Agent Peter Franklin and his team in full gear. They weren't there for a meeting. Principal Michelle Sparks, beloved, black, and brilliant, was their target. Sherman still had her district badge clipped to her blazer, her morning planner open on the counter, reading glasses perched on her nose. She'd spent 23 years protecting students. This morning, she'd protect her staff. The agent's body cameras captured everything that followed, a 30-second confrontation that would become the most expensive lesson in constitutional law ever taught in a school hallway. Before we go further, if you believe schools should be sanctuaries, hit that subscribe button. Stories like Sherman's don't get amplified unless we amplify them, and we're about to show you exactly what $12 million worth of courage looks like. The black SUV rolled in at 8:17 a.m., slow and deliberate, the kind of entrance that doesn't belong in a school parking lot. No sirens, no radio chatter bleeding through cracked windows, just the low rumble of an engine that had seen more federal operations than anyone inside Lincoln Academy could imagine. Agent Peter Franklin stepped out first, his movements tight and rehearsed, like a man who had done this dozens of times before and stopped thinking twice about where he was doing it. 3 agents followed, each one masked, each one armed, each one treating a hallway full of motivational posters and finger-painted art projects like it was a raid target. Inside, the morning was still breathing normally. Teachers carried coffee cups between classrooms, a custodian pushed a mop bucket past the trophy case. Principal Michelle Sparks was already in her office, door open, reviewing the day's schedule with the kind of quiet authority that made her the heartbeat of the building. And Lillian Sherman, clipboard in hand, reading glasses catching the overhead light, was doing what she did every single morning, keeping the machine running, keeping everyone safe. She didn't hear them at first. The hallway absorbed sound the way old buildings do, swallowing footsteps into tile and linoleum. But then Franklin's team passed the main entrance, and something shifted. The air changed. A teacher near the front office glanced toward the door and froze mid-sentence. A student near the water fountain looked up, mouth still wet, eyes wide. Sherman felt it before she saw it, that primitive instinct that tells you something in the room has turned dangerous. Then she saw them.
Masks, tactical vests, the word ICE stitched across one man's chest in bold white letters, but no visible badges, no uniforms that matched any local department, no judicial warrant in anyone's hand. Just bodies filling a hallway that was never designed to hold this kind of tension. Franklin's eyes moved across the space like he was scanning inventory, calculating distance, mapping exits. He wasn't here to talk. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to take someone out of a building full of children and educators, and he hadn't asked a single person for permission. Sherman set her clipboard down, slowly, deliberately, the way you place something down when you know the next 30 seconds are about to change everything. The security cameras mounted above the main office captured all of it, the SUV, the boots, the masks, the silence before the storm. Every frame would later become evidence. Every second would be replayed in a courtroom where a jury would decide just how much a hallway moment is worth. As it turned out, it was worth $12 million, but that part comes later. Right now, Lillian Sherman is about to draw a line. If you believe every school should be a safe haven, hit subscribe. Only trolls who support bullying will skip this one. Lillian Sherman had spent 23 years learning how institutions work, how they breathe, how they bend, and more importantly, how they break when the people running them forget what they were built for. She knew every protocol in the district handbook, every policy binder sitting behind her desk, every rule that existed to keep this building and the people inside it safe. And right now, every single one of those rules was screaming at her. She stepped forward. Not aggressively, not with raised hands or a raised voice. She stepped forward the way a wall holds its ground, still, firm, and completely unwilling to move. Franklin was already 3 steps into the hallway, his team fanning out behind him with the quiet efficiency of men who had practiced this choreography. He didn't slow down. He didn't look at her the way you look at someone who matters. He looked at her the way you look at a door you intend to open. Sherman spoke first. "Do you have a judicial warrant?" The words landed in the hallway like a stone dropped into still water, flat, clean, impossible to ignore. Franklin's pace didn't break, but something behind his eyes shifted, a flicker of recalculation, the kind a man makes when the script he rehearsed in the SUV just got interrupted. "We have authorization," he said. Not a yes, not a no, a redirect. Sherman didn't move.
That's not what I asked. I asked if you have a judicial warrant, a signed order from a judge authorizing you to enter this building and remove a staff member. Her voice was steady, controlled, the same tone she used during fire drills and parent-teacher conferences, calm enough to keep a room from panicking, sharp enough to make sure nobody missed the point. Franklin stopped. His team stopped behind him. For a moment, the hallway held its breath. "Ma'am, this is a federal matter. This is a school." Sherman cut through him the way a scalpel cuts, precise, clean, no wasted movement. "And until you show me a judicial warrant signed by a federal judge authorizing entry into this building, you are not going anywhere near my staff. Not today, not like this." The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room when everyone present understands exactly what just happened. A woman in a blazer and reading glasses had just told a masked federal agent no, in front of his team, in front of security cameras, in front of a hallway full of witnesses who would later remember this moment with painful clarity. Franklin's jaw tightened. His hand shifted, just barely, toward his radio. The agents behind him exchanged glances that carried weight. They hadn't come here expecting resistance. They certainly hadn't come here expecting it from someone holding a clipboard 30 seconds ago. But Lillian Sherman wasn't holding a clipboard anymore. She was holding a line, and she had no intention of letting it break. Peter Franklin had built his career on pressure. Not the loud kind, not the slammed fists or the raised voices that amateurs mistook for authority. His kind was quieter, colder, the kind that seeps into a room like smoke, filling every corner until the person on the receiving end starts to suffocate without realizing they're breathing something toxic. He had perfected it over years of operations in places where nobody was watching, where the people he confronted had no cameras, no witnesses, and no reason to believe anyone would ever hear their side of the story. But this hallway was full of cameras, and Lillian Sherman was not the kind of woman who forgot that. Franklin took a breath. Then he leaned in, just slightly, just enough to close the distance between them without crossing the line into something the footage would make look threatening. It was a calculated move, a pressure move, the kind designed to make a person feel small without a single finger being raised. "Let me be very clear with you," he said, dropping his voice to the register that was meant to sound reasonable but carried the unmistakable weight of a threat. "What you're doing right now constitutes obstruction of a federal operation. That's a criminal offense, a felony. Do you understand what that means?" He let the word hang there. Felony. It was supposed to land like a hammer. It was supposed to crack something open inside her, that place where fear lived, the place most people kept locked but never fortified. The place that whispered, "What if he's right? What if this is the hill you die on?" Sherman didn't flinch. She had thought about moments like this before. Not this exact moment, not masked agents in a school hallway, but moments where someone with power looked at someone without it and said, "Move or pay the price." She had seen it happen to colleagues, to parents, to students who didn't know they had the right to say no. And every single time, she had watched the person on the other end crumble. Not because they were weak, because the machinery of intimidation was designed to make compliance feel like survival. But survival wasn't what Sherman was calculating right now. She was calculating the law. "You don't have a warrant," she said. Not a question this time, a statement. Clean and surgical, delivered with the kind of calm that made Franklin's threat feel less like a thunderbolt and more like a man shouting into wind. "You don't have a warrant," she said. Not a question this time, a statement. Clean and surgical, delivered with the kind of calm that made Franklin's threat feel less like a thunderbolt and more like a man shouting into wind. The hallway cameras kept rolling. Franklin's jaw worked silently. Behind him, his agent stood perfectly still, caught between the orders they were given and the moment they hadn't prepared for. The next 30 seconds were going to cost someone a great deal more than they anticipated. Franklin made his decision in silence. No dramatic announcement, no warning shot fired into the ceiling the way it happens in movies. He simply nodded, once, sharp, the kind of signal that only men who have rehearsed violence together understand. And his team moved. They called it tactical spacing, a clinical term for something that was anything but clinical. It meant spreading out, closing the gaps, shrinking the hallway around a single person until there was nowhere left to go and no one close enough to intervene. It was a technique designed for warehouses and back alleys, for places where the ground was already hostile and the people inside had already been deemed dangerous. Sherman was neither. She was standing in front of a bulletin board covered in student essays about their dreams for the future. She had a blazer she had pressed that morning. She had a name badge clipped to her pocket that said staff. None of that mattered to the men closing in around her. The first agent moved to her left. The second slid to her right, just inside her peripheral vision, close enough to block, far enough to claim he was simply maintaining distance. Franklin stayed directly ahead, his hands open, but his body language screaming something his mouth refused to say out loud. The formation was textbook, practiced, and it was happening in a school hallway at 8:31 in the morning, while a custodian somewhere down the corridor pushed his mop bucket in perfect ignorance. Sherman didn't step back. She didn't raise her hands. She kept her eyes on Franklin, and she kept her voice steady. "I am asking you to stop." No one stopped. The agent on her left closed the gap first. A hand caught her arm, firm, deliberate, the grip of someone trained to control a body without technically breaking anything. The second agent moved in immediately after, and suddenly Sherman's space, this small, dignified rectangle of hallway she had been holding since this started, collapsed entirely. She was being moved, not gently, not with the kind of care you extend to a person who has done nothing wrong. She was being steered, redirected, her feet barely keeping pace with the momentum being applied to her frame. The lockers rattled as her back met them, metal against metal. The sound echoed down the hallway like a gunshot in a library, sharp, ugly, completely out of place. And the cameras caught every second of it. Every frame, every hand, every inch of space that was taken from a woman who had not raised a finger, had not thrown a punch, had not done anything except stand between masked agents and a principal who deserved to be protected. The footage would later show what words alone could never fully convey, the mechanical indifference with which power can be applied to a person who refuses to be moved. Sherman looked up at the camera mounted above the main office. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply looked, as if to say, "I see you watching, and so will everyone else." Comment, "I stand for justice" if you're not siding with Agent Franklin. If you think power should be used to intimidate women, keep scrolling. Michelle Sparks had heard the commotion before she understood it. The lockers rattling, the muffled exchange of voices that carried the wrong kind of energy, not the usual morning chaos of students and staff, but something tighter, colder, more deliberate.
She rose from her desk slowly, the way someone rises when instinct tells them the ground has shifted beneath their feet. She had been principal of Lincoln Academy for 11 years. She knew this building the way a surgeon knows a body, every corridor, every sound, every rhythm it kept when things were running the way they were supposed to. This was not one of those times. She stepped into the hallway and saw them immediately, masked, armed, moving through her school like they owned it. And there, pinned against the lockers, was Lillian Sherman, the woman who had held this building together for 2 decades, being handled by men who hadn't bothered to learn her name. Sparks felt something ignite in her chest. Not panic, not fear, something older than both. The kind of fire that burns in a person who has spent their entire life being told to be grateful for the space they occupy and has decided, quietly, permanently, to stop listening. But she didn't rush into the hallway. She didn't scream or charge forward the way every instinct in her body was demanding. Instead, she turned back into her office and picked up the phone. This was the moment Sherman's defiance had been buying time for. Because Lillian Sherman hadn't just stood in that hallway on instinct, she had bought seconds. Every word she spoke to Franklin, every demand for a warrant, every ounce of composure she held while her body was being moved against her will, all of it was a delay tactic. Sherman knew the district's emergency protocol the way she knew her own name. She knew that the front office had already flagged the intrusion. She knew that the automated alert had already fired the moment the security system registered unauthorized personnel in a restricted zone. And she knew that somewhere across town, in an office lined with law books and case files, a phone was ringing that would change everything that happened next. Franklin's team reached the principal's office door within minutes of the hallway confrontation. 2 agents positioned themselves on either side of the frame, their presence alone designed to communicate something simple and suffocating. This is not a negotiation. Franklin stepped in first. Sparks was standing behind her desk, composed, spine straight. The kind of posture that doesn't come from training, but from a lifetime of walking into rooms where people have already decided what you are worth and choosing every single time to prove them wrong. "Principal Sparks," Franklin said, his tone flat and bureaucratic, stripped of any pretense of courtesy. "We need to have a conversation." Sparks looked at him. Then she looked past him toward the hallway where Lillian Sherman had held the line. A silent exchange passed between them, 2 women who understood exactly what was at stake and exactly what had already been set in motion. "Then talk. My attorney will be here in 12 minutes. Franklin's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. The clock had started, and it was no longer running in his favor. They put her in the back of the SUV at 8:44 a.m. No Miranda warning delivered with any sincerity, no explanation of what she was being charged with beyond the vague, repeated phrase, obstruction of a federal operation, words Franklin dropped like a closed door every time Sherman asked for specifics. The vehicle was cold inside, the kind of manufactured chill that hummed from air vents designed to keep agents alert on long drives, not to make passengers comfortable. Sherman sat in the back seat, hands zip-tied in front of her, still wearing the blazer she had pressed that morning. Her reading glasses had slipped down her nose during the takedown at the lockers. No one had helped her fix them. She hadn't asked. The holding facility was 40 minutes away. 40 minutes of silence, broken only by the occasional radio transmission between agents coordinating on frequencies Sherman was not meant to hear. She listened anyway. She cataloged every word, every call sign, every detail that her attorney would later need to reconstruct the timeline of what had just been done to her. Because that was who Lillian Sherman was. Even zip-tied in the back of a federal vehicle, her mind was working, not with panic, with precision. The processing room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with the same indifferent hum as the ones in her school hallway, but here they felt different, colder, more clinical, like they were designed to make a person feel less than human before anything else happened to them. An officer behind a desk took her fingerprints without looking at her face, took her phone, took her district ID badge, the same one she had worn every day for 23 years, and placed it in a plastic bag like it was contraband. Sherman watched it happen, all of it, every mundane, degrading step of a system that was built to strip identity from a person and replace it with a number.
She had seen this system from the outside her entire career, had read about it in policy briefs, had discussed it in staff meetings, had shaken her head at news reports about people who didn't deserve to be inside a room like this one. Now she was inside it. The holding cell was small. Concrete walls, a metal bench bolted to the floor, a single light fixture behind a cage that buzzed with the same mechanical indifference as everything else in the building. Sherman sat down on the bench and placed her hands on her knees. She breathed. In, out. Slow and deliberate, the way she taught stressed students to breathe during fire drills.
She thought about the cameras. She thought about the footage. She thought about Michelle Sparks standing behind her desk with her spine straight and her attorney 12 minutes away. She thought about every educator in the city who had never imagined that a morning at school could end like this. And she thought about what 12 minutes could change. Because somewhere across town, a courtroom was about to learn exactly what it costs when a system designed to protect people decides to consume them instead. Subscribe if you believe the law should apply to everyone, even federal agents. Only those who love gatekeeping and corruption will ignore this. Her name was Catherine Voss, and she had spent the better part of 2 decades dismantling systems that believed themselves untouchable. She wasn't loud, she wasn't theatrical, she didn't need to be. Voss had the kind of intelligence that operated the way water moves through stone, slow, patient, and completely unstoppable. She had built her reputation on cases where the machinery of federal power had turned on the very people it was designed to protect, and she had won more of them than most attorneys had even attempted. When the district's emergency line rang at 8:29 that morning, it was Voss who answered. And by the time she walked into the holding facility where Sherman was sitting on a concrete bench, she had already begun pulling the thread that would unravel everything Franklin thought he had built. The first document she requested was simple: the operational authorization for the raid on Lincoln Academy, the paperwork that justified sending masked, armed agents into a school building on a Thursday morning. It should have been straightforward: a standard federal order, signed, dated, and filed through the proper channels, a formality, a rubber stamp on a process that had been followed to the letter. Except it hadn't been followed at all. Voss spread the documents across the conference table in the district's legal office like a surgeon laying out instruments before an operation. Each one told a piece of the story. Each one revealed another gap, another place where procedure had been skipped, another box left unchecked, another rule that existed specifically to prevent what had happened inside Lincoln Academy's hallway. The policy was called the Sensitive Locations Directive. It had been in place for years, a federal mandate that explicitly restricted immigration actions at schools, hospitals, churches, and other locations deemed protected spaces. The language was unambiguous. Any operation targeting a sensitive location required prior approval from senior leadership, a documented threat assessment, and, critically, a judicial warrant signed by a federal judge. Not an assumption, not intelligence, a warrant, a legal instrument issued by someone with the authority to authorize it. Franklin had none of these things. Voss read through the operational file with a kind of stillness that preceded every case she had ever won. No dramatic reaction, no gasp, just a slow, deliberate turn of each page, her eyes moving across the text with surgical focus, cataloging every violation like a prosecutor building a case brick by brick. Because that was exactly what she was doing. The agents had not contacted the district school before entering. They had not filed a threat assessment. They had not obtained a judicial warrant. They had entered a protected location, confronted a staff member who lawfully challenged their presence, physically detained her, and threatened her with federal charges, all without a single piece of documentation that gave them the legal right to do any of it. Voss closed the file and looked up at the district supervisor sitting across from her. "They ignored every protocol that exists," she said. Her voice was quiet, measured, the kind of calm that carries more weight than any shout ever could. "Every single one." She paused. "And we have it all on camera." The courtroom was still when Catherine Voss stood up. Not the polite stillness of an audience waiting for a performance to begin, the held breath kind, the kind that fills a room when everyone present understands that what is about to happen cannot be taken back once it starts.
Voss buttoned her jacket with one hand, picked up a single sheet of paper with the other, and walked toward the witness stand where Agent Peter Franklin sat with the posture of a man who had rehearsed his answers a dozen times in a prep room down the hall. He was about to stop rehearsing. "Agent Franklin," Voss began, her voice carrying the same quiet precision it had carried in the district's legal office weeks earlier, "can you describe for the court the intelligence that led your team to Lincoln Academy on the morning in question?" Franklin shifted, a small movement, barely visible, but enough for anyone watching closely to understand that the ground beneath him had just changed. He spoke carefully, measured words, strung together like a man walking a tightrope he hadn't known was there. The intelligence had come through interdepartmental channels, a flagged report, credible information suggesting that an employee at the school may have had an irregular immigration status. He delivered each sentence with the rehearsed confidence of someone who had been coached to sound certain. Voss let him finish. Then she placed the document on the witness stand, face up, angled so the courtroom could see it. "Is this the report you are referencing?" Franklin looked down. His jaw tightened, the kind of tightening that happens when a person sees something they hoped would never see daylight. "Yes." "And does this report contain a single name, a single specific individual identified as the target of your operation?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. "No." Voss let that word sit, let it breathe, let the jury absorb what it meant. "Then what does it contain, Agent Franklin?" Another pause, longer this time. Franklin's eyes moved to his attorney, then back to Voss. When he spoke, his voice had lost the rehearsed edge entirely. "A demographic profile of the school's staff." The courtroom exhaled, not dramatically, not with gasps or murmurs, but with the quiet collective understanding of a room full of people who had just watched a man with a badge admit, under oath, that he had walked into a school full of educators and targeted a black female principal not because of evidence, but because of what she looked like. Voss nodded once, turned back toward the jury, said nothing. She didn't need to. If you can't stand people like Franklin who abuse their power, comment, "Everyone deserves respect" below. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, not because the evidence was unclear, not because the case was complicated. 6 hours was the time it took 12 people to sit in a room and agree on a number large enough to match the weight of what had happened inside Lincoln Academy's hallways. Large enough to say collectively and without ambiguity, this was wrong, this was inexcusable, and this will not be forgotten. Catherine Voss stood when the jury filed back in. Sherman sat behind her, hands folded in her lap, the same posture she had held on the concrete bench in that holding cell weeks earlier, calm, still, watching. The foreperson rose. The verdict was read aloud in a voice that carried no emotion, flat, procedural, the way verdicts always are. But the number itself did all the work that tone could not. $12 million, awarded to Lillian Sherman and the district she had spent her career protecting. A figure that landed in the courtroom the way a stone lands in glass, clean, shattering, impossible to pretend didn't happen. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence that followed the verdict was heavier than any applause could have been. It was the silence of a system being told by its own jury that it had failed. That masked agents had walked into a school without a warrant, without authorization, without a single piece of documentation that gave them the right to be there, and had physically detained a woman whose only crime was knowing the law better than they did. Franklin sat motionless at the defense table. His attorney leaned in and whispered something. Franklin didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the middle distance, on a point past the jury, past the judge, past the walls of the courtroom, somewhere in the hollow space where certainty used to live. Sherman didn't celebrate. Not publicly. Not the way the cameras expected her to. She simply turned to Catherine Voss, nodded once, and stood. But the story didn't end with a verdict. In the months that followed, Sherman took the settlement and did something no one predicted. She didn't disappear. She didn't retreat into the quiet comfort that $12 million could buy.
Instead, she built a foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting educators in sensitive locations across the country. Training programs, legal resource networks, emergency protocols designed so that no school administrator would ever have to face masked federal agents alone and improvise a defense on the spot. She named it The Line, because that was what it had always been. Not a moment of heroism, not a dramatic act of defiance captured on camera for the world to replay. It was a line drawn by a woman who understood that protecting people was not optional, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon a person carries is simply the willingness to stand still when every force in the room is telling them to move. Lillian Sherman had stood still, and it cost the federal government $12 million to understand why. Subscribe and drop a comment on what you think of Lillian's bravery. Like and share this video if you want to see more bullies get what they deserve. Only haters won't share the truth.